They leaned in close, their voices sharp enough to cut through the music and laughter around us. "You're just a leech," my father hissed, his breath reeking of wine. My mother's eyes narrowed with the same disgust. "We gave you everything, Jennifer, and still, you're nothing without us." That was the greeting I got at my own family's celebration. Not a hug, not a smile, just venom, as if the years of sacrifice, the endless hours of studying, the late nights finishing my degree meant nothing. I had walked across that graduation stage only weeks earlier, clutching a degree in environmental science that I thought would finally earn me a shred of respect. Instead, here I was, cornered at a glittering San Francisco party my parents had thrown, not for me, but for themselves. The chandeliers sparkled. The guests laughed. My sister Jessica twirled in her silk dress, soaking in the spotlight. And I stood in the shadows, nursing a champagne glass I didn't even want, hearing my own parents spit words that should have shattered me. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't the weak link anymore. They saw a daughter they could mock, belittle, and control. What they failed to see was the storm building inside me. A storm that would one day rip open the polished walls of their empire and expose the rot that festered beneath. Because that night wasn't just another family gathering. It was the beginning of the end. Their words lit the fuse, and their plan, to humiliate me, to erase me, was already in motion. They thought they'd written the script, that I'd stumble through it like the obedient daughter I had always been. But I had already decided, if this was war, I wasn't going to lose. And if only they knew, I wasn't the one who'd be sleeping that night. Before we dive into how my own family tried to poison me for money and silence, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I always love seeing just how far these stories travel. When people look at families like mine from the outside, they see the mansion, the expensive cars, the charity galas, the glossy photographs in magazines. They see success. They see elegance. They don't see the cracks in the foundation, or the way those cracks can swallow a person whole if they're not careful. For as long as I can remember, my parents treated me like a burden they never wanted but were forced to keep. They had this way of smiling at me in public, hand on my shoulder like I was their prized child, while whispering reminders in private of just how useless they believed I was. "Not as smart as Jessica," they'd say. "Not as beautiful. Not as charming. You'll never shine the way she does." Jessica was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she got into trouble in high school, it was brushed off as youthful mistakes. When she blew through their money on shopping sprees and designer vacations, it was self-expression. And when I quietly worked 2 part-time jobs to cover my own tuition gaps, it wasn't applauded. It was ignored. My accomplishments didn't fit the story they wanted to sell to the world. The manipulation was subtle, almost elegant in its cruelty. If I challenged their favoritism, they'd laugh in my face. "Stop being dramatic, Jennifer," my mother would say, twirling her wine glass like she was above the conversation. "We love you both equally." And if I dared to point out the endless list of ways that wasn't true, I became the ungrateful daughter, the jealous sister, the bitter one. They could twist any protest of mine into more evidence that I was the problem. That was their favorite game, gaslighting me until I doubted my own reality. And the truth is, for years I played along. I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, earned more, proved myself, they'd finally see me. That degree in environmental science wasn't just about my passion. It was about clawing for validation that would never come. But at that party, standing there in my simple black dress, while Jessica floated around the room like some shimmering goddess, it hit me. No matter what I did, they would never see me as their equal. That night, the whispers cut deeper than the music. Relatives and family friends leaned close, casting glances my way as if I couldn't feel the weight of their stares. Aunts asking Jessica about her plans, uncles congratulating her on her bright future. And when they turned to me, their questions came laced with pity. "So, Jennifer, what's next for you?" The tone said everything. They weren't asking because they cared. They were asking because they already believed I had nothing to offer. Even Jessica joined in, smiling that perfect smile our mother had perfected before her. "Jen's just finding her path," she said loudly enough for the table to hear. A ripple of polite laughter followed, and my parents nodded along like it was the most accurate description of me. A lost cause, a wanderer, a leech. But underneath their laughter, something else was happening. I caught the way my mother leaned close to my father, their voices low, but not low enough. I saw the way their eyes darted toward my glass, then back at each other. The way my father placed a reassuring hand on Jessica's arm, like he was already preparing her for something. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that years of being gaslit had made me paranoid. But the looks weren't in my head. The whispers weren't just my imagination. Something was brewing, something uglier than words, and though I couldn't name it yet, my gut told me the truth. This wasn't just another night of insults and humiliation. This was different. This was deliberate. And for the first time, I wasn't just the scapegoat daughter anymore. I was a witness. A witness to the beginning of a plan I wasn't meant to survive. I should have walked away from that table. I should have ignored the looks, the whispers, the way my parents hovered like predators circling their prey. But something inside me told me to stay quiet, to watch, to listen. And that instinct saved my life. It started with my mother. She had that habit of holding her glass close to her lips while she whispered, like she was sharing secrets with the rim of her wine flute. "It has to be tonight," I heard her say, her words slipping out between the clatter of silverware and the low hum of music. My father leaned in, his face tight with irritation. "Stop fidgeting. No one can know. We've arranged everything. By the time she feels it, it'll be too late." At first, my mind refused to process it. Too late. Feel what? My stomach clenched, and I lowered my gaze, trying not to draw attention as I shifted slightly closer. My heart was hammering so loudly, I was certain the entire table could hear it. And then it happened. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne, tall, slender glasses lined up like soldiers. My mother's hand darted out first, plucking one with a speed that seemed rehearsed. My father's hand followed, and I caught the faintest glimpse of something, small, white, dissolving, swirling near the bottom of one glass before he gently set it down in front of my seat. The bubbles rose cheerfully, disguising the sinister truth. My own reflection wavered in the golden liquid, mocking me. I froze. Every warning bell in my head screamed at once. I lifted my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I caught my mother watching me. Not the usual look of disdain or disappointment. This time, it was something colder. Calculated. Expectant. It was then that the puzzle began snapping together in my head. The inheritance. The $12 million my grandparents had left me. Money my parents couldn't touch until I turned 23. Money that had always been a sore subject in our house, a constant reminder that, for once, I had something they couldn't control. And there was more. My degree in environmental science wasn't just a piece of paper. I knew things about their company, about the quiet settlements, the hidden reports, the rivers near our factories that ran thick with chemicals no one dared talk about. I had seen the files my father left open late at night, documents he assumed I didn't understand. But I understood perfectly. And I had threatened once, just once, that if they didn't back off, I would go public. Maybe I had underestimated how far they'd go to protect themselves. My hand hovered above the stem of the glass, my skin prickling with the weight of every eye in the room. Were they watching? Did they know I knew? The chandelier above seemed to cast a spotlight over me, pressing me down, urging me to take that first sip. Jessica's laugh rang out across the room, sweet and oblivious. She drifted closer, wrapping an arm around me, her perfume overpowering the sickly sweet smell of champagne. "Lighten up, Jen," she teased, nudging me toward the glass. "It's a party. You should celebrate." Celebrate. That word nearly broke me. I forced a smile, my lips trembling, and nodded like nothing was wrong. Inside, my thoughts spiraled. If I drank it, I was done. If I refused, they would know I suspected something. And if they knew that, what would they do next? The glass gleamed under the chandelier, daring me to choose. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly where I stood with my parents. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their flesh and blood. I was an obstacle, a problem that needed solving. And tonight, they had already chosen the solution. My fingers brushed the stem. My heart pounded against my ribs, so hard I thought it might crack them open. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The moment that would decide whether I lived or died. And I knew with chilling certainty I couldn't let them win. I could feel the sweat gathering at the back of my neck, trickling down my spine as I stared at that glass. The golden liquid sparkled so beautifully, so innocently, you'd never know it was laced with betrayal. My chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, panic threatening to choke me. For a few terrifying seconds, I thought about surrendering, about just taking the sip, letting it all end, giving them what they wanted so I could finally be free of their voices, their cruelty, their endless judgment. But then I looked at Jessica, my perfect sister, glowing under the chandelier, her laughter rising above the chatter like a bell. She didn't notice the danger swirling in the glass. She didn't notice the way our parents kept watching me, their faces taut, their smiles frozen. She was blissfully untouched, unaware of how close she stood to the center of the storm. And something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to die for them. I wasn't going to hand them the victory they craved. My mind raced, options flashing in and out like lightning. Run. No, they'd catch me, and questions would follow. Pretend. No, I couldn't fake drinking it, not with my parents' eyes locked on me. Then the idea struck, reckless, cruel, but maybe the only way out. I glanced at Jessica's glass. She had just set it down, untouched, as she fixed her hair in a mirror across the room. My hand trembled as I placed my glass next to hers, fingers moving with a calmness I didn't feel. One swap, one little sleight of hand, and the trap they'd set for me would spring shut on someone else. The guilt hit me before I even did it. She was my sister. She had been cruel in her own way, yes, smirks, mockery, playing into their favoritism, but she wasn't the mastermind here. She wasn't the one who'd tried to erase me from existence. Still, I knew that hesitation would kill me. So I moved quickly, smoothly, switching the glasses as if I were just adjusting the table. No one noticed. Not even Jessica. Moments later, she lifted the glass without thinking, clinking it against mine with a careless grin. "To your future," she said, her voice light, almost mocking. And then she drank. I felt the blood drain from my face as the champagne slid past her lips. Each swallow was a countdown, each smile of hers a reminder that I had chosen survival over loyalty. At first, nothing happened. The party carried on, laughter and music echoing against the high ceilings. My parents chatted with business partners, their masks of charm perfectly intact. But then Jessica's laugh caught, breaking into a cough. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes widening in confusion. The room fell quiet as the cough turned to a gasp, then a choke. Glasses clattered. Chairs scraped back. Jessica's body swayed like a dancer losing her rhythm, and then she crumpled to the floor, her silk dress pooling around her like spilled ink. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed, rushing to her side, voices overlapping in a storm of panic. Someone shouted for a doctor, another for an ambulance. I just stood there, frozen, my own glass still full in my hand. And then I saw them, my parents. Their faces drained of color, their eyes wide, but not with grief. No, what I saw was fear. Raw, unmasked fear. Because they knew exactly what was happening. They knew the drink meant for me had found its way to Jessica instead. My father dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her shoulders, calling her name, but his voice cracked in a way that betrayed him. My mother's hands trembled as she pressed them to her mouth, her perfect poise shattered. Around them, the party dissolved into hysteria, but in the middle of it all, their secret was bleeding through every expression, every movement. And I just stood there, torn in half. The guilt was a blade in my chest. Jessica didn't deserve this, not like this. But the other half of me, the colder half, whispered that maybe this was the only way. Maybe the only way to stop monsters was to let them taste their own poison. As the sirens wailed in the distance and guests ushered medics through the doors, I met my parents' eyes. For the first time, they didn't see a leech. They didn't see a burden. They saw me, someone they could no longer control. And I promised myself, right then and there, I wouldn't let the guilt drown me. Not until the truth was exposed. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Sirens wailed in the night as paramedics worked over Jessica, her face pale, her body limp against the stretcher. I sat in the corner of the ambulance, numb, my hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. The guilt clawed at me, screaming that I had done this, that I had chosen to let her drink from that poisoned glass. But beneath the guilt was something else, rage. Rage that my parents had pushed me so far that survival meant sacrificing my own sister. By the time we burst through the emergency room doors, my parents were already rewriting the story. My father stormed in first, barking orders at the doctors as if money could bend medicine. She must have had an allergic reaction, he insisted, his voice tight, controlled. My mother nodded, her face streaked with carefully timed tears. She's always been sensitive. She must have eaten something. Their words poured out, slick and rehearsed, while Jessica's body convulsed on the gurney. I stayed silent, watching. Every lie they told tightened the noose they had built for themselves. Because unlike everyone else in that room, I knew the truth. I knew exactly what had been in that glass. Hours passed. Doctors worked. Machines beeped. Finally, just before dawn, Jessica's eyes fluttered open. Her voice was weak, cracked, but her first words cut through the air like a knife. What happened? My mother rushed to her side, smoothing her hair back, whispering soft lies. You fainted, darling. Just exhaustion, that's all. But Jessica's gaze drifted past her, finding me. Our eyes locked, and in that silence, I knew she remembered. The glass, the toast, the sudden sickness. She remembered everything. Later, when the doctors cleared the room, I slipped in quietly. Jessica lay propped up by pillows, her skin still ghostly pale. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "That wasn't an accident, was it?" I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "No," I admitted. "It was meant for me." Her eyes widened, horror mixing with realization. She didn't argue. She didn't laugh it off or call me paranoid. She just closed her eyes and nodded, as if she had always known deep down what our parents were capable of. That was the moment the guilt shifted into something else. No longer a weight pressing me down, it became a weapon, sharp and purposeful. Because Jessica hadn't died. She had survived. And her survival meant I had a witness. I didn't waste time. While my parents hovered in the waiting room, rehearsing their story for the 100th time, I stepped outside and made the call I had been dreading for years. My hands trembled as I dialed, but my voice was steady when the FBI tip line picked up. I told them everything. The inheritance. The attempt on my life. The documents I had seen, proof of toxic waste dumping, illegal chemical disposals, pollution they had buried under layers of forged reports. It all came pouring out of me, years of silence breaking in one desperate confession. On the other end of the line, the agent didn't sound surprised. Just calm. Focused. They asked for names, dates, locations. And I gave it all to them. By the time I hung up, I knew there was no turning back. My parents had always called me weak, but in that moment, I felt stronger than I ever had. Strong enough to finally bring them down. Back inside, I found them pacing. My father's face was red with frustration, my mother's voice sharp as she whispered about damage control. But when they saw me, when they saw the calm on my face, something shifted in their eyes. Suspicion. Fear. As if, for the first time, they wondered whether I might be more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And they were right. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. About showing the world who they really were. And I was ready to burn down everything they had built to make sure the truth came out. The investigation began faster than I ever imagined. Within a week, the FBI had already reached out, requesting the documents I'd hinted at during that late-night call. I didn't hesitate. Every scrap of evidence I'd collected, the files I had copied, the photos I had taken of waste barrels near rivers, the emails I'd stumbled across when my father left his laptop unlocked, went straight into their hands. For years, I'd been terrified of the truth, afraid of what would happen if I spoke it out loud. But now the fear had shifted. I wasn't afraid of silence anymore. I was afraid of letting them win. The agents worked quietly, weaving their net, and it wasn't long before the first cracks appeared. A junior accountant from my parents' company turned whistleblower, confirming the embezzlement schemes they had buried beneath layers of shell companies. A factory supervisor came forward, describing how waste was dumped at night into streams that fed into nearby neighborhoods. Every testimony was another nail in the coffin of their empire. At first, my parents brushed it off as rumors, as jealous employees trying to tear them down. But then the subpoenas came. Offices were raided, files seized. The glossy facade they had spent decades building began to crumble. I'll never forget the day it hit the news. Morning anchors with bright smiles broke the story. Prominent San Francisco business owners under federal investigation for environmental fraud and financial crimes. Their names, my parents' names, splashed across the screen, no longer symbols of success, but of corruption. I watched from the hospital waiting room, Jessica at my side, her hands still wrapped in mine. She was recovering slowly, her strength returning day by day, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. She had seen the truth for herself. She knew the drink hadn't been an accident. And when the reporters mentioned an anonymous family source who had provided critical information, she didn't look at me with anger. She looked at me with something I had never seen in her eyes before: respect. For the first time, Jessica wasn't the golden child. She wasn't the flawless daughter under their control. She was my ally, my sister in truth. We sat together in silence, watching our parents' empire unravel on the television. My mother's perfectly curated smile plastered across the screen in old interview clips now seemed grotesque, a mask cracking under the weight of lies. My father's booming voice, once a symbol of authority, sounded hollow when paired with the words fraud and criminal investigation. Calls started pouring into the hospital. Reporters hounded the lobby, desperate for a quote. Investors pulled out. Charities returned donations. Friends who once clung to my parents like shadows vanished overnight. In less than a month, the people who had controlled every corner of my life became pariahs. But it wasn't just about their reputation. It was about justice. When the FBI revealed the extent of the environmental crimes, the poisoned water, the communities that had fallen sick, the cover-ups that had gone on for years, the outrage was deafening. Lawsuits piled up. Families demanded answers. The world finally saw what I had always known. Beneath the wealth and the power, they were nothing but predators, feeding on whoever was too small to fight back. And in that storm, Jessica stood beside me. She testified to what she remembered from the party, how the glass had been switched, how the collapse hadn't been sudden but deliberate. She told investigators what she had heard, what she had seen in the panic on our parents' faces. Her voice carried weight mine never could, because she had always been their golden child. And now, even she was condemning them. There was no greater justice than that. When the indictments came, I expected to feel nothing but triumph. And yes, there was satisfaction, sharp, burning, undeniable. But there was also grief. Grief for the years wasted trying to earn their love, for the childhood lost to their cruelty, for the bond between parent and child that had been poisoned long before they ever touched that glass. Still, as I stood beside Jessica, her hand steady in mine, I knew we had won. Not just against them, but against the silence they had tried to force on us. For once, the truth was louder than their lies. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was free. The arrests came early on a gray Tuesday morning. I remember the sound of heavy fists pounding against the front doors of our family estate, the echo ricocheting through the marble halls that once symbolized wealth and power. This time, they weren't filled with guests in glittering gowns or business partners with champagne flutes. They were filled with agents in dark jackets, voices firm, commands sharp. My parents were dragged out of their empire in handcuffs. My mother's carefully styled hair fell into her face, her eyes wide with disbelief, as though her beauty alone could shield her from justice. My father shouted, his booming voice reduced to desperate denials, but there was no audience left to believe him. The neighbors watched from their driveways, cell phones raised, whispering, pointing, recording the downfall of the people who had once ruled over them like royalty. I stood back, watching it all unfold, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and relief. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, and yet when it finally came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. Because no matter how many crimes they had committed, no matter how many lives they had poisoned, they were still my parents. And that truth would always ache. The trials dragged on for months. Evidence piled higher than their lawyers could bury it. Embezzlement, fraud, bribery, environmental destruction. The list stretched longer than I could have imagined. Witness after witness took the stand. Victims of their greed. Workers silenced by threats. Families whose children had been sickened by toxins dumped into their backyards. Each testimony was another piece of their legacy unraveling in public. And through it all, Jessica and I sat together. She testified when asked, her voice steady even as her eyes filled with tears. I spoke my truth, laying bare the years of manipulation, the night of the party, the glass of champagne meant to erase me. By the time it was over, there was no doubt left. The world knew exactly who my parents were. When the sentences were handed down, decades behind bars, fortunes seized, reputations ruined, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, some cried, some cheered. I sat still, staring at the people who had given me life, and then tried to take it away. My mother's eyes searched for me one last time, desperate, pleading. My father glared, his rage burning even through defeat. But neither of them said a word. And I didn't either. The inheritance finally came to me, the $12 million my grandparents had left in my name. For years, my parents had schemed to take it, but now by their own downfall it was mine. And yet, when the papers were signed and the funds transferred, I didn't feel rich. The money didn't erase the scars. It didn't make me forget the nights I spent crying, the words they hurled like weapons, the poisoned drink that almost ended me. It was a strange kind of freedom, bittersweet, heavy with the knowledge of what I had lost. I had survived, yes. I had won, yes. But I had lost the illusion that family was supposed to mean love. I had lost the hope that one day they might change. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. But as I looked at Jessica, alive, healing, finally free of their grip, I knew we still had something worth holding on to. For the first time in our lives, we weren't pitted against each other like rivals in their twisted game. We were sisters, survivors, partners in rebuilding something out of the ashes. I didn't choose blood over truth. I chose survival. I chose justice. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break you. It remakes you. And though the scars will never disappear, neither will the fire that carried me through. In the end, that night at the party was more than just a turning point. It was the moment I finally understood the cost of survival. My parents chose greed over family, lies over love, betrayal over loyalty. And in doing so, they lost everything. I didn't walk away with a sense of triumph. I walked away with scars, reminders of how far they were willing to go just to silence me. But I also walked away with something stronger, the truth. And once the truth was out, no amount of money or power could protect them. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about survival. It's about showing the world who people really are when the masks fall away. My parents tried to poison me into silence, but instead, their own poison destroyed them. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have switched the glasses? Or would you have found another way out? Do you think I went too far, or was it the only way I could survive? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them, and your thoughts make these stories come alive. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That way you won't miss what's coming next. Because next time, we're diving into the story of a wedding gone horribly wrong. when a cheating fiancé gets exposed at the altar in front of 200 guests and the maid of honor holds the receipts. You won't want to miss that one.